Welcome everybody to Wall Street Reporter's next Superstock Company Spotlight. We are speaking with Novamentis Life Sciences. We have the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Marvin Hausman, and we have a special guest, John Molinaro. I'm going to introduce both of you in just a second. But the reason why we're doing this interview, this is going to be really a deep dive, if you will, into psilocybin as a potential treatment for autism spectrum disorder, and what Novamentis is doing in this space. Of course, there is a lot of growing investor attention on Novamentis right now because the company is, I think, the first psychedelics company which has FDA's orphan drug designation for Fragile X syndrome in autism. And most importantly, there is an upcoming phase 2A trial, which is weeks away. And that could be obviously a major catalyst for the stock. So the idea of today is we want to kind of learn a little bit about autism, the science, psychedelics, the microbiome, the effects on dopamine and serotonin, and all of that. We'll get into all those details. And we have the two experts here. So we'll get everything hopefully that investors need to know. So with that said, I first want to introduce John. Marvin, we know Marvin. Our audience has met several times, but can you give us a quick? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What you're doing with Colors of the Spectrum. You're based in Toronto, right?
That is correct, Jack. So first, I'd like to say, Jack, thank you for giving Marvin and I a platform to discuss such groundbreaking ideas. So for me, this whole idea started 3 years ago, where I was looking for different alternatives for autism intervention. And at that time, it was just a dream. It was a dream of how can psychedelics or cannabis also help support autism? So a little bit about myself. So my current title is BCBA, or Board Certified Behavior Analyst, which essentially is a specialist of applied behavior analysis, which, as we know, is the #1 evidence-based intervention for autism. So when an individual receives an autism diagnosis, the only form of intervention that's evidence-based to date is applied behavior analysis, and that's what I specialize in. So about 3 years ago, I started my own organization called Colors of the Spectrum ABA, where we provide one-on-one in-home ABA services to families and kiddos who've been diagnosed with autism.
Okay. And how did you connect? How did the two of you connect? Novamentis, Dr. Hausman, and you?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I've been in the field of special needs for almost 12 years now, specializing in autism for the last 5 years. And I've learned that as wonderful and as effective as ABA therapy is, and it truly is beautiful when it's done with a therapist or a clinician that likes what they're doing and knows how to apply the science effectively. But I realize that it does have its limitations as well. So I've always been an advocate of medicinal cannabis and psychedelics. So I started doing my own research, and I found that actually in the past, psychedelics have been studied with children, specifically with autism. And so I started looking at psychedelic companies and seeing what research they're doing. And that's how I found Novamentis. I saw that they had an announcement of they were doing some studies with autism. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. And the timing also was incredible. So I took a shot in the dark, and I sent an email, and I connected originally with Julia. And she said, John, I like what you're doing. Or sorry, I reached out to them saying, my name is John. I'm from Toronto. This is what I'm doing. How can I jump on board? How can I offer my services to support you guys in this study? And from there, I very quickly connected with Marvin, and it's been a back and forth symphony since then.
Okay, now that which brings us to Dr. Hausman. So Marvin, can you give us a snapshot, kind of you have a long history in drug development, a doctor, a surgeon, and you're really an expert. You're actually one of the world's leading expert on mushrooms, right? And can you kind of give us a snapshot of your kind of history from medicine into mushrooms and your research into psilocybin, and maybe you can give us an explanation of what you believe is happening with the microbiome and how it affects potentially the brain and everything else, and and then we'll tie everything in together, and then we'll go deeper into, autism and everything else.
Yeah, I'm going to come back a little bit to what John said. In order to be a good dancer, you got to know jazz, ballet, tap. If you just focus on one modium, you're not going to be successful. It's the same thing in drug research. If we're going to be successful against autism, we just don't want to develop a drug. We want to get on the ground, in the trenches. If you're watching a wrestling match, you see a different picture if you're looking from the top of the ring than if you look and you're at the floor of the ring under the wrestlers. So I need to develop a drug, but I also need the interface with someone with John's ability. And that fits in perfectly with our phase 2A study. So he's going to be examining the patients that we're treating. This is very important. You want someone who's in the trenches, who knows the behavioral problems, who knows the diagnostic problems, and then he interfaces with the phase 2A study with Health Canada. So it's a beautiful relationship. I wanted to come into that first. My involvement in mushrooms started many, many years ago. Mushroom is a food. I'm a transplant surgeon. I liver transplants, kidney. I'm a board certified kidney surgeon. What am I doing with mushrooms? Well, I love exploring nature. Nature is absolute. Most diseases are inflammatory in origin. Inflammation is the root cause of most diseases. The word itis, or the little 4 letters at the end, myocarditis is inflammation of the heart. ITIS. Myo is carditis, it's inflammation of the heart. Hepatitis, inflammation of the liver. Pancreatitis, inflammation of the kidney. Of the pancreas. Hepatitis, liver, nephritis, kidney. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to show that inflammation also in the brain. Okay, encephalitis, encephalomyelitis. These are inflammatory conditions. So it's very important to look at anti-inflammatories as part of the treatment process. If you have an inflammatory reaction that's causing a disease, the treatment would be an anti-inflammatory. The mushroom kingdom is the largest food kingdom in the world, 40,000 mushrooms. Most are not edible. Most have excellent substances that we need to research. So I chose about 30 years ago, 10 of the most known edible mushrooms, and I formed a relationship with Dr. Robert Beelman at Penn State University, which is one of the largest food science universities in the United States. And I became fascinated with his expertise, and he and I worked together looking at these anti-inflammatory molecules in mushrooms. And then I decided that I would look at Parkinson's disease, which is an inflammatory disease of the brain. That's why you have tremors. You have a tremor because your nerves are in a hyperexcitatory state. And by the way, suicide is an inflammatory reaction. It's not a genetic problem that someone commits suicide. Something happens in the brain and it gets out of control, and that's inflammation.
So Marvin,
yes.
On that note, Marvin, would you say that psilocybin has the potential to be an anti-inflammatory, or is it an anti-inflammatory?
Absolutely. That's why I developed the mRNA genetic profile, because I want to prove whether psilocybin can modulate these inflammatory molecules. For example, when a child is born, there's less serotonin in those that develop autism, less than the normal child. And as that child develops to age 7, 8, 9, its serotonin level starts going up. The normal child has perfect neuroplasticity in utero, age 1. age 2, when the nerves are forming, the synaptic connections between nerves. And that neuroplasticity needs serotonin. My feeling is that serotonin is an orchestra leader. It's moving these genetic molecules called ribonucleic acid. I don't want to bore all the readers. mRNA. It's an orchestra leader moving all these instruments to create normal brain tissue. If you have less, you don't have a normal orchestra functioning. And I think psilocybin, being a serotonin agonist, which means it stimulates a receptor. So LSD is also a serotonin agonist. It's going to stimulate different receptors. And so I wanted to create, and I did this with the help of Thermo Fisher Scientific, a major genetic company in the world, and I created 52 genetic mRNA. I didn't create them. I put them into a panel. I chose them. And we're going to study those as a snapshot of autism in different ages of children that are admitted to the Health Canada study, the Fragile X study. So the primary outcome of that study is going to be the behavioral modification that John studies. The secondary outcome is going to be changes in serotonin levels, and we're developing technology to measure serotonin in saliva. We're also taking cheek swabs, and we're going to measure the 52 mRNA inflammatory molecule in your cheek cells. It's non-invasive, and we're going to have a snapshot of a child as it enters into the treatment program, and we can define maybe subsets of Fragile X or subsets of autism, depending on which program we're doing. And then we can give the repetitive microdose therapy of psilocybin, and we can get into why macrodose versus microdose and the history of autism and treatment. And we're going to do that for 30 days. We're going to do we're going to do the primary outcome reanalysis, the cheek swabs, the serotonin, day 0, 2 weeks after treatment, 4 weeks after treatment, and 2 weeks after stopping treatment. And treatment will be every other day for 30 days. I think it's a fantastic program, and I'm looking forward to working closely with John.
So Marvin, what you were describing earlier, those were the biomarkers, right?
Yes, they're biomarkers. Serotonin is a biomarker. I can give you another example. I don't want to usurp the conversation, but if you have chest pain and you call 911, they come to your house and you say, God, I'm nauseated, I have chest pain, I think I'm having a heart attack. Well, they put you in the ambulance and they take you to the ER. But while you're on the ambulance ride, they're taking some blood and they're measuring a protein called troponin. Troponin is a biomarker that is released from damaged heart cells. If your troponin level is normal, you're not having a heart attack. Maybe you injured your chest. Maybe you strained it. Maybe you have pneumonia. So that's a biomarker. And we need biomarkers in most diseases because autism is a behavioral abnormality. It's a developmental disorder that manifests itself with social problems, anxiety, memory problems. These children, it's diverse. And so there are probably subsets of this disorder. And by having these biomarkers, the mRNA, 52 genes, serotonin levels, we maybe can relegate these children to different categories that will respond best to psilocybin microdose therapy.
Okay. And that brings us to John. So John, essentially colors of the spectrum. So your organization. So explain to us what you do. And so autism is not one thing. There's a spectrum, right? And you got Fragile X. explain to us what you're doing. And
for sure, I just want to piggyback off of what Marvin just said, because it's actually pretty incredible of looking at biomarkers diagnostically. So as of right now, in order to get an autism diagnosis, the gold standard is looking at the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, the DSM, and seeing if a child meets criteria. In order for the child to meet criteria, there's a certain domains that are pervasively affected. And if the child is affected across, let's say, 3 out of the 4 domains, they will meet criteria. So what Marvin is saying is that we might be able to develop the technology to look at biomarkers to see if individuals that have a diagnosis, let's say, have this level of serotonin or whatever the case may be. And that's incredible, because right now, if I may speak spiritually even, we're looking at outside factors to diagnose a kiddo, right? Does this particular kiddo or individual have a deficit in social connection? What's their eye contact like? So we're looking externally to diagnose. Whereas, again, what Marvin just said is we might be able to develop technology to look internally, which of course is going to make diagnosis so much more effective and even earlier on in a
and it's absolute. I mean, it's basically it's absolute. It's not what does it? It's black and white, basically.
Exactly. Right. Versus having to rely on.
It's not subjective. It's not.
Yes.
It's not subjective to,
just like this interview, there are pictures of us up in front of your audience. That's a snapshot.
Right.
That's my image. But what's your image inside looking at your genetics?
Yes.
What does mRNA look like? What do 52 genes look like? We haven't got into that. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to have you interview our artificial intelligence expert. Maybe we can arrange that. So they will then discuss how you can take these multivariate data points mm-hmm. and look at them at the same time. Because
exactly.
When you take an image inside the brain, you're expanding to thousands of data points. Mm-hmm. And that's the answer for the future.
Okay. Let's dive into maybe, and John, I'll start with you. Okay. So exactly what's going on? This is the thing I have a question. I never really, I never heard about autism, 20 years ago,
right.
Whatever, all of a sudden now there's this, explosion. You hear autism everywhere. So first of all, exactly what is autism for anybody? Obviously we're 15 minutes into this. Maybe somebody doesn't know.
Yes.
What exactly is the spectrum of autism, and why is there's this explosion all of a sudden, which I don't think we've had before. Maybe it was, we didn't know about it.
Good question. And I don't know if there is an actual answer as to why there's such an uptick in autism diagnoses. Often people are saying, well, our assessment tools are becoming much more advanced, so we're picking up on it more. I personally don't think that's what it is. I think there's just overall a drastic increase in autism. I think the number now, and don't quote me on this, I believe it's 1 in 40 or 1 in 50 kiddos are being diagnosed. Whereas, again, going back 30, 40 years, those definitely weren't the numbers. And as Marvin said, it's a neurodevelopmental condition often affecting social communication and also behavior. So what does that mean, right? Excuse me. So when we have a kiddo diagnosed with autism.
If I could send you a cough drop, I'd send it. I'm using cough drops, so I don't cough, but I'll have to send it virtually.
Yes, that would be that'd be very good right now, Marvin. Thank you. Yeah. So what does it mean when a child has social deficits? And this is where I think, or this is why I think autism is such a devastating condition, because in order to have a fruitful life, you need to be able to connect. I like to use the word connect. So, so an individual who is diagnosed with autism, they have social deficits and they also have behavioral deficits. In the behavior realm, we're looking at ritualistic or repetitive behaviors. So again, what does that mean? A repetitive behavior, I like to classify them more as sensory behaviors. So a stereotypical sensory behavior that a lot of people know about autism is something like hand flapping, Okay, so something similar like this, where a child will engage in repetitive sensory behaviors. And it's not always hand flapping. There's a wide range of what sensory behaviors look like. That's a big part in an autism diagnosis. It's that social deficit and also those behavioral challenges. Now, I can really use that cough drop, Marvin.
Okay, it's on its way.
Oh, perfect. It'll get here in about 6 to 8 weeks.
If we can get
Okay, so
I got to go through customs in Canada.
I'm not paying for customs, by the way, Marvin. It's going to be on you.
Do you want to get some water? You want to get some water? We can take a break for a second.
I have some.
Okay.
No, that's
so when we look at repetitive behaviors or restrictive behaviors, that could look like an individual needing to have things very much the same throughout their daily routine. So similar clothing. And again, this is a spectrum. So some individuals that have a diagnosis, there might be higher on the spectrum, which means actually higher or lower is kind of interchangeable across professionals. So an individual who, let's say, is severely impacted might need to have the same exact routine throughout his or her entire day. So similar clothing. I need to be addressed by a similar person in the morning. My mom is the only person that could wake me up. Or a more specific category is diet, right? So we often have individuals who have autism have a very restrictive diet. And oftentimes those foods are not nutrient rich. They're actually the opposite. They're usually nutrient deficient. And again, I don't want to speak for all of the autistic community, but a vast majority of people are challenged with something like this. I have a few kiddos. So again, at the autism, at the Colors of the Spectrum ABA facility, we work with children from anywhere between the ages of 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. That's kind of where we specialize. And a lot of our kiddos do have very restrictive diets where they only like to eat a certain type of chicken nugget or a certain type of pizza or some sort of, again, nutrient deplete food. So what does that mean?
And basically, and if the parents say, hey, you can't have it, they throw a fit.
Yeah. And what I've experienced is,
right.
Unfortunately, this happens early on. So they might fall into this repetitive behavior or restrictive diet early on. And then the parents just want their kids to eat, right? And it's like, okay, if my kid's only going to eat this, okay, I'm not happy about it, but at least my kiddo is eating. So from there, it goes from, 6 months, 8 months, 2 years, 3 years. And then when it comes down to, they're 4 or 5 years old, we can see that they're very nutrient deficient and we have to intervene. It's a major challenge because the kiddo has understood this is what I eat all the time. Now you're trying to introduce a fruit or a vegetable. And when we know that ritualistic and routine-like behaviors are predisposed to autism individuals, that's a huge mountain for them to climb, right? It's a different texture, it's a different smell. It looks different. How am I supposed to put this in my body? So
yeah, John, this is very interesting. I mean, I want to segue to something you told me, that you had a family where you changed the diet and the autistic symptoms got better.
That's correct.
In remembering that?
So not so much the diet, but what ends up happening with these individuals who are on a very restrictive diet, of course, their bowel movements tend to be affected as well. Either they're constipated or, there's a wide range of GI and digestive issues that can develop. So oftentimes what goes hand in hand with a restrictive diet is Restoralax or some sort of laxative. So I have a few families that unfortunately had to accept that, okay, we're going to have to be on a laxative for an extended period of time. And Marvin, you can also speak to this. When an individual is on a laxative of any kind, it's affecting their microbiome, right? It's affecting their overall gut health.
Absolutely. And what's interesting here, and that I think this is where we're going in Nova. And I like the word Nova on Nova, Jack. We're doing a Nova breakthrough here on Nova. Only 5%. Remember, we talked about serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. only 5% of serotonin is produced in the brain, 95% in the bowel, in cells called enterochromaffin cells, and also bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
So what John's mentioning here is what we call the gut-brain axis, that maybe your intestines are telling your brain what to do. Did you ever think about that?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a very profuse disorder, a spectrum. A lot of it could be through the immune system in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
That a corrupted immune system is producing molecules that go to the brain. We think Parkinson's disease may also be an intestinal disorder. If that's true, now you may try to approach why 1 to 2% of the world population has autism.
Okay.
It's
So it's not in the,
environmental too.
I'm sorry. Okay. So it's not in the brain. It really could be something that's starting from the stomach, from the gut.
Yes, because this is where the microbiome comes in. This is where your inflammation comes in. If you have a corrupted immune system in the gut, say you had a terrible infection, or you ate something, or you took chemicals, and you really upset your immune system in the gut, they produce these inflammatory molecules that migrate up the vagus nerve into the brain.
Right.
It's called the gut-brain axis, or enteric CNS axis, central nervous system axis, directly communicating with the brain. And that's where Nova's looking at now.
Yes.
We're not saying we have the answer. We're trying to approach the answer. Like Plato said, you never know, you approach. And we're going to be looking at these markers with the idea that in Fragile X or other syndromes of autism, that there could be subsets that could be pulled out and treated differently. And so all of that knowledge is going to be accumulated by Nova on Nova.
Okay. So basically, so we're getting very close. So essentially, we're going to talk a little bit about, the mushrooms, psilocybin, but the main, so it seems to be like the axis, Marvin, you call it the brain gut axis. Can you explain what the microbiome is? We're starting to hear more and more about the microbiome, like it's becoming this new focus in the
I'm catching his cold. So,
yeah, so it seems like there's a lot of interest in the.
Jack, I have to remember my numbers. A human being, we're cells. We're 70% water. A human person, a 70-kilogram male or female, is 30 trillion human cells. I think we could look this up. I'm almost sure I'm close. 100 trillion bacteria, with 3 times more bacteria. So our whole body, I don't even know what's holding us together, Jack. Think about it. We only have 30 trillion mammalian cells and 100 trillion bacteria in our skin, in our eyes, in our intestines. We're bacteria. That's the microbiome. So maybe are the microbiome controlling our existence? Are we controlled by bacteria?
That'll be very ironic, no? That something as humble as a bacteria is responsible for.
There's a language. The bacteria have their language. Cancer cells have their language. Cancer cells talk to each other. You have breast cancer. How does a breast cancer respond to chemotherapy? It doesn't want to die, so it starts talking to its fellow cells and says, hey, they're giving us this drug. We better change what we look like. The same thing with that COVID. What are these mutations of COVID? What's happening? Why is the bacteria, why is COVID mutating? Because it doesn't want to die.
So Marvin, if I may interject, just to simplify, going back to Jack's question about microbiome, is it safe to say that microbiome is in other words gut health or gut bacteria?
I think microbiome is human health.
Okay.
Just gut health. I mean, you have Look, if you have an infection of your skin, you get redness. What is that redness? It's inflammation. Your body's responding to bacteria. If you have a virus, doesn't your nose get inflamed because you have viral particles in your mucus coming out? I mean, you have a sore throat, laryngitis, inflammation of the larynx, so you can't speak.
So microbiome is not exclusive to the gut.
No, it's in the brain too.
Okay, so let's kind of tie this all in together.
Yes.
How does the microbiome, mushrooms, the brain? I mean, where does the microbiome, is the microbiome the connector between, like, what is? Let's get to the mushrooms and specifically psilocybin.
Well, psilocybin, and I was asked before, and I didn't answer John because I got off on a tangent with the microbiome. Psilocybin, I think, is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent. And I want to prove that. So psilocybin in mushrooms are very powerful. Why is psilocybin in mushrooms? Why is it a food? It shouldn't be restricted. It should be decriminalized. You're eating a food. And then in Nova, we didn't just focus on psilocybin. We focused on what are the children of psilocybin? What are the brothers and sisters of psilocybin in the mushroom? There are other tryptamine derivatives. It's a family. There's baeocystin, aruginacin. You have so many different psychedelic mushrooms. They're all different. Why would they have all of these substances in the same mushroom and in different mushroom? If one was the answer, remember, foods are perfect. You eat carrots. You don't just think of the red color when you eat a carrot. Carrots are a food. There are many nutrients in a carrot. Most people don't think what they're eating.
That's a very good point, Marvin.
Nutrition is dramatic. You're alive because of nutrition and because of water. Remember, the human body is 70% water. And I want to look at autism as a new language. What's the language of the microbiome? What's the language of the body? What is that autistic child saying to itself in the brain? And we're going to look at that. We're only approaching that answer, but that's why we're developing microdose therapy. How are you going to look at changes? If you kill a fly with a hammer, you don't need to use a hammer. Why would you give a huge dose to a 5-year-old child?
Right.
Use a small dose. See what the response is.
So, Jack, I feel like
got to change the industry, and John can address that. He knows what I'm talking about between hallucinogenic side effects and macrodose therapy.
So I'll take it away, and I'll try and tie it all together neatly for us, Jack. So again, for the last 30, 40 years, the only form of intervention for autism has been applied behavior analysis. And we haven't talked too much about what that looks like. So I'll try and take us on a short journey of when an autistic individual gets...
John, so the only treatment right now for autism, there's only behavior analysis. There's no drug. There's nothing. There's no like magic bullet.
Correct.
They do use antidepressants called serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and John and I have talked about that.
Yeah,
that's not the treatment of autism. That's an antidepressant.
Yes.
So
again, I would classify it as more of treating symptoms. And so again, it's if an individual who's diagnosed with autism is already going through, let's say, ABA therapy for most of their life, and we're able to successfully reduce some of their symptoms, but they're still naturally aggressive or they're still having depressive tendencies, that's where pharmaceuticals tend to come in play. But it usually is later on in the life of the individual. So going back to what I mentioned, or to your question, I should say, Jack, is yes, ABA is the only evidence-based intervention. In my time, I have heard of a lot of different individuals or different companies trying to say that they have the cure. They have this groundbreaking intervention. They're using sound therapy or they're using hyperbolic chambers. So there are other interventions out there, but ABA is the only evidence-based intervention with 30 or 40 years of research behind it. So again, I'll take you on this little journey. I'll try to make it as concise as I can. When an individual does receive a diagnosis, let's say between the levels of 1, 2, or 3, and that illustrates your severity. So a level 1 autism diagnosis usually means it's quite mild. They might not present with a whole lot of autistic symptoms or behaviors. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which is level 3. That's when you have an individual who's severely impacted, where, again, social communication is at a minimum, their language might be severely delayed, and they might have a high level of these repetitive or restrictive behaviors. So a kiddo or an individual like that, more often than not, they're going to be in ABA therapy full time, which can look like 30 or 40 hours a week of ABA therapy for an extended amount of time. And this is where I've learned that, as wonderful and as beautiful as ABA is, we're treating symptoms at the end of the day. We're not getting to the root cause or the biomarkers that Marvin mentioned as to what is disconnected or imbalanced. We're treating symptoms. And it's wonderful because we do, through good ABA therapy, you are able to teach that individual or that kiddo how to connect at a certain level where before they didn't have that skill set. So ABA definitely has its place in autism intervention, and I'm a huge advocate of it. That's why I specialize in it. But again, there needs to be something else to look more internally versus externally. And that's where I feel psilocybin might be that missing key. There's a huge amount of anecdotal evidence of autistic adults who have ventured down this road, who have realized, for 26 years of my life, I haven't been able to connect with people. And then they've reached a point where I'd try anything, and they look to psychedelics, and then there they have it. They have that missing link that they've been missing for so long. And this leads into the topic of macrodosing psilocybin or microdosing. So my goal or my vision when I started on this quest is, can we introduce psilocybin safely and effectively to kids so that they don't have to go 20 years of severe autistic symptoms before they can get some sort of alleviation from that? If we can safely administer it to a kiddo that's 2 or 3, we might be changing their trajectory forever, which is amazing. So that's where, for me, psilocybin and the current ABA therapy tie together nicely. And that's what me and Marvin and Nova Mentis are trying to discover right now. And if I may just continue on this tangent, because I'm on a roll here, there's already been evidence of this hypothesis. Back in the 60s, before, I guess, psychedelics were outlawed, doctors and psychiatrists have, they've already been looking at LSD, psilocybin, other psychedelics on autistic children. There are several studies where they've taken a certain amount of participants which have autism or schizophrenia, and they've delivered every day a small dose of LSD for months. This is every day for months. And the fact that these studies their results are indicating an increase in social connection, an increase in overall general mood, a decrease in aggression. These are phenomenal results from these studies. And they've laid the groundwork for individuals like Marvin and myself to take it and run with it and bring it into the 21st century. And so that's what we're trying to do here.
Let me, as a layman,
Jack, I'm sorry, it would be beautiful. And this is why I'm in this game. You take autism as a devastating condition for the child, for the parents, for society. It's omnipotent in our world. We're not getting rid of it. If I could lower, we're doing this phase 2A study in Fragile X, which is a very specific disorder of autism. It's the largest genetic subset of autism. When you have Fragile X, you have autism. There's no question, that subset. In animal models in Italy, and we discussed this at the last interview, Our product worked beautifully. 5 attempts, general autism, then 2 attempts with Fragile X, perfect response. We changed social interaction, we lowered anxiety, we increased cognition. Let's just say from the phase 2A study that we lower inflammation or anxiety by 10%. It's not a lot. What response will that child have to behavioral modification by John?
Yes.
I'll let him answer that.
Yes. So I'll answer that question with an illustration. So some of the kiddos that I've experienced in my career range again from minorly impacted by autism to severely impacted. And those kiddos who are severely impacted, again, with going back to those repetitive or stereotypical behaviors, will be happy to sit there and self-stimulate for hours on end. And again, that could look like hand flapping. It can look like auditory self-stimulations where they're constantly making a sound. It could maybe be rocking. So we have a developmental condition where these kiddos are happy to be completely removed. I shouldn't say they're happy. I should say they're content by being within themselves and self-stimulating for hours on end. So if I have a 5-hour window in a day to provide ABA therapy, and I have a kiddo who is, again, severely impacted and happy to self-stimulate for that entire 5 hours, I might be effective using ABA strategies to reduce that self-stimming by maybe 5%. So in that 5-hour window, I might be able to get collectively maybe 10 to 20 minutes of good quality teaching. So what Marvin is saying is if we have a compound that we can administer safely to a kiddo that reduces those symptoms even by 10, 15%, as Marvin said, we now take that 5-hour window and make it effective for 2 hours, for 3 hours, versus only having 10, 15 minutes of teaching. I hope I explained that clearly. And again, if there are individuals in the autistic community listening to this, I'm speaking generally. So I don't want anyone to think that every autistic child or individual is constantly stimming, because that's definitely not the case. But those who are more severely impacted, even with intensive ABA therapy, 30 hours, 40 hours a week, there's only so much we can teach because we're competing with that self-stimulatory behavior. So again, if we have psilocybin that's effective in reducing that self-stim, we just have loads more room for teaching, for one-on-one teaching.
Okay.
Let me
practical.
take it one step further so the audience may understand that. You have receptors in the brain. These receptors are not working properly. That's why the child is doing what he's telling you, these behavioral manifestations, but there's a receptor that's doing that in the brain. That receptor could either have less sensitivity or be hypersensitive. That's why, say for example, we give a microdose amount of psilocybin, say 1.5 milligrams, but we do it repetitively. So we may be decreasing the sensitivity of that receptor on a repetitive basis, not just one bolus, kill the fly.
Mm-hmm.
But the behavior is John has to go and see the child again. So these small baby steps, small microdose therapy may lead to major behavioral changes.
Right.
That's the point. But we have to look at what is the sensitivity of the receptor. They're called the 5-HT1A receptor, 5-HT1C receptor. And those are the receptors that are involved in neuroinflammation. This flapping, what the child does is an inflammatory reaction. It's a nervous reaction, flapping. You don't just flap.
Mm-hmm.
The nerves have to stimulate the arms to flap. It's a beautiful relationship we're establishing here at Nova.
Okay, so let's talk about kind of the from a practical standpoint, I guess the way, insurance company, the crude, realities of the economics of the world is, okay, so right now, the only potential treatment is this, behavioral therapy, right? Which is, I'm sure it's not cheap, right? Like to treat autism right now, how much does it cost per year, let's say?
Okay,
I know it's a wide range, but
yes,
give us some, right.
I'll give you a ballpark. And again, I can only speak for Ontario. I'm not sure how autism services look globally. So in Ontario, an ABA service, which we mentioned, can be anywhere between 10 hours of ABA therapy a week to upwards of 30 or 40 hours a week. Generally speaking, the price range per hour of ABA can again range from $40 or $45 up to $60 or $70. Now, that's a hefty fee for a family to swallow. There is some funding that the government does provide, but there's giant wait lists for families to receive that funding more often than not. And if they do receive that funding, it's a fraction, right? We're looking at, so currently, what the government is doing here is, because there's such a huge influx and they're trying to reduce that wait list, they're just giving families a lump sum of about $20,000.
So $20,000 per year, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money and I mean, that's probably just the start.
Exactly. So the government is providing that to families, but that goes very quickly. If you have a kiddo that's in full-time ABA therapy, you're going to blow through that in 2 or 3 months, give or take.
Okay.
So then you have the rest of it. So generally speaking, depending on the severity of the diagnosis, your ABA fees can be anywhere between 40 to 60, if not more, thousands of dollars a year.
Okay.
The government right now is providing $20,000.
Okay, so you're in Canada, in the U.S., everything. It's probably just. I mean, I don't know. It's probably Marvin. I don't know. It's probably like the same or off the charts. I mean, 50 grand a year plus.
It's not. That's not including drug therapy.
Yeah.
So if you throw drug therapy in, it's an astronomical fee. I understand. For example, I think the serotonin reuptake inhibitors in the U.S. and I have, we have different medical costs between Canada and the United States, is about $1,200 to $1,400 per child. That's a lot of money for most families when they have to feed themselves and they have an autistic child. And Prozac, which is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, I think it's $1,200 a year. That's a lot of money.
So let's say, let's say we get to Nova's, psilocybin-based therapy, the capsules. Let's say it gets commercialized. I don't know, down the road over here. I don't know, Marvin. Is it too early to talk about the cost? So let's say insurance company, they can see the cost benefit analysis. Okay, do we spend X for this, and then we reduce, instead of spending 50 grand on therapy, we can save, I don't know, 40 grand with this psilocybin therapy.
Well, yeah, that's called outcomes research. I mean, that's what we're going to do. It's a little premature. We have to see the results from the phase 2A study. We're going to know very quickly what the response is. We're talking about a 30-day study in 15 to 20 Fragile X children. Again, in cancer therapy, I'm showing you an analogy. The US FDA approves drug that adds 30 days to a person's life, just to allow the family to see that person who they love for another 30 days. If that's true, if we're able to lower anxiety or increase cognition in an autistic child that's 3, 4, 5 years of age, that has another 40, 50 years of life ahead of them, by only 10 or 15%, you've got a grand slam home run.
It's a no-brainer. Yep.
It's a no-brainer. And the insurance companies are going to go crazy over this because look at what the costs we're decreasing in psychiatric care. We're not using now serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And then we have to cost out the drug, of course, but it's going to be much less. We're using microdose therapy every other day. Then the question is, do we use it for a month? Do we stop? Do we do it for another month? we're first beginning. We're approaching the answer. But Jack, I think we're onto something major here, and I can't wait to see the results from the phase 2A study.
So let's bring it all, wrap a bow around everything. Okay, so you got
You have a PhD when you're finished with all this, Jack.
I know this is great. No, okay, so basically, from the investor's perspective, anybody watching this, I mean, again, people who are watching this, they just want, okay, they're focused on the stock. How do we make money with the stock? So, what they want to know is, okay, what is the path, towards commercialization you have right now, and when can this, and people who are watching this who have, who are dealing with autism, they want to know, when is this potentially going to be on the market, because it's going to have a major impact on their life, a major benefit for their life.
Let me take that for a minute.
Marvin, give us the path, like from here we are.
That's a deep hole, but I'll jump in, Jack, okay? And John, when I got involved in Pills Bioscience, which is the company that was acquired by Nova, and John had originally contacted Pills Bioscience, and I took on this project. I said to them first, I do a classic pharmaceutical approach. I've been very successful before. I had a New York Stock Exchange corporation that was taken over by King. It's now part of Pfizer. I didn't tell you that last time. Pfizer bought King. So I think I have a good track record. But a classic pharmaceutical approach means you have an API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient, that you can reproduce in manufacturing. And I said to the people at Pills, if you want me involved, we have to agree that the first thing we're going to do is we're going to manufacture large supplies of active pharmaceutical ingredient. We're going to start with non-GMP, which can be used in animal research, which is identical to cGMP, except that you test stability and you have other testing that the FDA wants. And so we have now the largest supply for research and commercialization of Schedule 1 psilocybin in the United States, maybe in the world. We're sitting on that. That drug is waiting for a license to go to Canada because it's a Schedule 1. I wish we didn't have to do that. I mean, with having our manufacturer send it to the university to Toronto University where they're manufacturing the final pills, I mean, it's not going into the human population. It's under regulation, but we have to wait for a license. That license comes through. In the next 30 days, we submit our application. We have the capsule, and we're not going to submit it without the capsule. So we're going to know very quickly what the cost will be, Jack, and we're going to know the results. But we have reproducible CMC product that's going into a human being. We're different than every other one in the industry. We're not using mushrooms. We're not using isolates. We're using pure, almost 100% pure psilocybin. And that cost is going to be much lower than what the cost is in society today. But I can't give you an exact number.
Okay. So you got the study that's going to be starting, I don't know, we're weeks away from the study.
I would say, well, we have to get the license.
When I say weeks, we're talking, roughly, I'm exaggerating, 6 to 8, right? Ballpark?
Yes. Yeah.
6 to 8, weeks, multiple. So 6 to 8 weeks away from the actual study beginning. And
let me also say that I just got our partner in Canada is one of the largest CROs in Canada, KGK Science. Okay, they just sent me, and I have to review it, a 72-page dossier. 72 pages. That's the whole clinical submission to Health Canada. We're ready to go. We have the pill. We put the submission in.
Okay, so once the pills are manufactured with your partner, or was it? I think it's Ontario. What's the name? The manufacturer is
Toronto Institute of Pharmaceutical Technology.
Okay,
I call it TIPT.
Okay, so
sorry for coughing. I think the rules with Canadian Health Health Canada, is that when you submit, they have 30 to 45 days to respond. If you don't get response in that period of time, I think you could start the study. That's pretty dramatic for us.
Okay. And the study will go for, you said 30 days approximately.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. After
So
that,
we already have probably 6 families with Fragile X children that want to enroll them. We even have 3 children in Norway, Oslo, Norway, but it's a Canadian study. But we think we're going to enroll pretty quickly because we're the only ones. We're the only ones that have. Nova is the only company in the world that has orphan drug approval for use of psilocybin in Fragile X syndrome. Only company in the world in Europe and the United States. Canada doesn't have orphan drug status, but they have other statuses, and we apply for that too. But we're the only ones who have this. We're going to have a quick answer. And I think, look, I can't talk for the stock. A market controls a stock. I can only talk for research. And I've been at this game a long time. I can't wait for the results. And the market will take care of the stock.
and just to be clear, so essentially the study is for Fragile X, which is the subset of autism. And I just realized we're almost towards the end. I didn't even discuss. John, maybe can you address Fragile X exactly? The symptoms and all that, and where it is kind of on the spectrum. But the idea though is, correct me if I'm wrong, Marvin, is that once we have an approval for, let's say, Fragile X, there could be label expansion off-label to other parts of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's true. Pharmaceutical companies can't advertise off-label use, but the doctors will read the research papers. We're about to publish a major research paper on the results, the preclinical results in 5 animal studies. No one's seen this yet. We want to file patents on it first. And so that study is going to probably come out in the literature this coming summer. And then when the doctors see the results from the Canadian study, they can use the drug wherever they want. We can't promote it, but they're going to say, if you increase memory in Fragile X, can you increase memory in Parkinson's disease?
Okay. Going back to John. So John, can you describe Fragile X exactly and what's going on here?
So Jack, just to backstep a second, I believe that Nova Mentis is actually having 2 projects underway. So the Fragile X study, the clinical study, is separate than the autism observational study. Is that correct, Marvin?
Yes, absolutely. 300 patients in the IRB approved in Canada and the United States. It's the largest clinical observational study in autism that's in the last couple of years, and it has institutional review board approval. That has been launched. In 2 weeks, we already have enrolled 60 patients. Gives you an idea what's happening so quickly in the autism field. The families are going to reach out. It's amazing. We just sent out the kits for the buccal swabs, the saliva, and they're going into the families. 60 in less than 3 weeks.
And again, Jack, going back to your question about Fragile X, I feel like Marvin is actually more of the specialist with Fragile X, where my expertise is more autism spectrum disorder. I know they're very similar in nature, but my experience with Fragile X, the genetic disorder, is quite limited. So if anything, Marvin would be able to field that one a little bit better than I.
So I got.
I know you want to move quickly. Let me pick that up real quick. It's a genetic disorder. It's the FMR gene. FMR1 gene. You remember I talked about the orchestra leader in the brain. When the child is developing a brain, that orchestra leader is it's called the FMR protein. It's moving the pieces around to make nerves connect with each other. When they have a problem with the FMR gene and it gets mutated or gets methylated, you have Fragile X syndrome. The father transmits that. Mainly, it comes from the parents. It's very interesting. The father transmits it more to girls, even though it's more, the Fragile X is more occurrence frequency in males, 1 in 4,000, 1 in 7,000. So we have more to learn about that. But it's an absolute genetic disorder. There's a mutation, but not every child, even if the father or mother has that FMR mutation, develops Fragile X. There's a language going on. That's where we want to study the other genes and see what's going on there. They're probably subsets of Fragile X.
Okay, but so there's two separate studies. There's an autism study and there's a Fragile X. I'm sorry, I got these two confused. So the phase 2A Health Canada, that's for Fragile X.
It's a treatment study.
Treatment
the
study.
observational study is not a treatment study.
Okay. So there's a treatment study and there's an observational study going on. So the observational study, this is what John is doing.
He's doing both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I might be able to make it more clear for you, Jack. So the observational study is looking more at the mRNAs, if I said that correctly, Marvin, and the serotonin levels in autistic individuals. So we're starting with, let's take some data on what their serotonin levels look like. I'm imagining that eventually, after we receive that data, we're going to push through to see if we can introduce psilocybin as a treatment. Is that correct, Marvin?
Absolutely. We've already talked to the FDA about that. It's called real-world data, real-world evidence. The FDA is very interested in having objective biomarkers to substantiate the behavioral changes. And when we told the world about this clinical observational study in 300 patients, we notified the patients and the guardians and the parents that they will have a priority in the to-be-launched FDA study in autism, not Fragile X. So when we finish the submission, I haven't really talked about this to the audience before. Once Health Canada approves that submission, the next day we're applying to the US FDA. So your audience can know that we're not going to. This was the first step, baby step, a very calculated chess move. Start the study, develop your 1.5 milligram capsules. Remember, you got a Schedule 1 drug. We're going to have to go back to the DEA in the United States and the FDA. So we're doing Canada right away, and immediately we're applying to the FDA. Remember, that submission to Canada can just be repackaged, put in an envelope, and sent to the FDA. We'll have the 1.5 milligram capsules produced. We'll ship it back to the US. We'll get a license for it. So this is going to, by the end of the summer, I hope to have an FDA study approved.
Okay. And then from there, just for the layman, like what's the path towards commercialization?
Well, the first thing we have to do is see the results, of course. And then immediately, if those results are robust, I'm not shy. You're talking about an unmet medical need. You're talking about families that are crying out for help. I would apply immediately for sympathetic approval to Health Canada if we have good results from this study. Well, you don't lose anything. I always say nothing ventured, nothing gained. They might approve it and say, you didn't have any side effects. You had great clinical results, behavioral results that John's going to study. What do we lose by approving it? Let's approve a limited study. Nova, continue researching it. If you have any side effects, keep reporting the data to Health Canada. This could be a very dramatic development. And the FDA might do the same thing. I've done it before with the FDA. The FDA allows doctors to have, it's called a doctor-initiated IND. And I've done 2 of those myself. And they gave me a sympathetic protocol in my office for the treatment I wanted. So if a pediatric neurologist wants to submit Nova Psilocybin to the US FDA for sympathetic IND, he can get that. It's his responsibility, but you can move fairly quickly when you know how to go through the machinations of the government. And we've done it before.
Okay. So theoretically, if you get, robust data, let's say, by the end of, the summer, we're talking about the end of the summer, let's say you get robust data from the study, you will move to get sympathetic approval from Health Canada. And
well, say we had, this is an open clinical study.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Say we had 20 patients enrolled. What if I look at 10 patients? I can look at the data. What if I say, my God, I've never seen results like this in my life. I'm going to show it to the government. I'm going to call for a meeting and say, please advise me. Look at what these children are responding here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to continue for 20 or can we look at 10? Depends on the robustness of the results.
Okay. So in other words, the better the results. So in layman's terms, when you say the robustness of the results, so in other words, the better the results are, the bigger the improvement, then they're not going to ask for as many potential patient population for the trial.
Well, they're asking for, look, we have to commit. We're committing to 20 patients.
Okay.
You have about a 20% dropout in any clinical study. People get sick, they move away. 20% of 20 is 4. So now you have 16 patients. Okay? So we have to see how quickly we enroll those 20 patients, what dropouts there are. I know you're asking hypothetical questions, but we have the ability without compromising the power of the study. It's not a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, which I've done called the phase 3. This is an open clinical study, phase 2. So I'm able to look at the data, and you can be sure that we're going to be looking at side effects every month, every week. We're going to be looking at clinical results. We're going to be running the mRNA, and we're going to see what we have.
Okay, but potentially, if you have good, robust data, I'm only focused on one thing. I'm sorry, that's what the business I'm in. Look, okay, so if you have good, robust data, potentially you could apply for sympathetic approval from Health Canada. Let's say by September. I'm just possibly.
Absolutely.
Okay,
and that's a strong word. Absolutely. The only thing holding us back is enrollment.
Okay. So let's say you get the sympathetic approval. That means you can start selling the drug in Canada.
No. When you have a clinical study, you can't charge for the drug to patients. Now, what could happen, and I don't want to go there, I got to be careful, is that Canada has allowed other clinics to use psilocybin. John maybe can address this better than me. I don't know all the rules. So doctors could theoretically apply to Health Canada to use Nova Psilocybin.
Before you answer, I just want to say for investors who watch this, the main thing though is if you do get this robust data, which everything is pointing to some incredible results. At that point, the value of the company becomes much greater than it is today, because today it's let's face it, it's speculative. You don't have human data, it's lab data, very impressive, but once you have the human data, all of a sudden you have something which drug companies, I don't know whether it's Lilly, Pfizer, whoever it is, they say, wow, we should pay $200 million for this.
By the way, I'm going to challenge you, Jack. You can answer that better than I can. You can look at all the biotech companies you follow. Which ones are phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and see which ones went to $40 to $80 a share. Then the next day they're at $5 because the phase 3 study didn't work.
Right.
So, but I think the march towards approval, the phase 2A study, is going to be very important for the future valuation of this company, from my experience.
No, 100%. I mean, that's really, I mean, in terms of purely from the way the markets work is as the company, gets to that phase two, then when you get the data, that's where you get that big, real upside. And then, you get to phase three. I mean, by the time you go from phase three to commercialization, it's already the stock could be up already, 50x, and there's less,
Wait, wait,
there's
wait.
less
I
upside.
love you 10 baggers and 50 baggers, but Jack, if right now Congress has cannabis before it for approval, what if Congress decriminalized psilocybin or LSD? Decriminalize it so we could do sorry, the proper research without restrictions, not commercializing it. What would Big Pharma do? I know I'm going another step. If you were Pfizer and Merck and you're not in the psychedelic market because of the regulations, and suddenly the regulations are opened up, they're going to say, oh, we better start looking at which companies have data. Who has the 300-patient autism observational study? What is that data worth on serotonin levels? What is that data worth on mRNA genetic analysis? This company has 52 genes that they can show you a snapshot at the beginning, the middle, and the end of a treatment. What is that worth in other neurologic disorders? Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's disease. You're opening, the brain is an island that is protected, and we're finally entering the brain. Katie, bar the door.
So what you're saying is, again, for the investors who might be watching this, essentially is besides just what you're doing, the data you have based on these studies is extremely valuable to other pharmaceutical companies who might be in the research stages developing treatments for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc.
Absolutely. But we have to see good data. Hey,
Yeah.
we still have to do the study with John, the phase 2A study in Canada, the observational North American study. We're going to know pretty soon by the end of the year what we have. Could be very powerful.
If you had to put a I don't know, a dollar amount, what could the data be worth? In other words, you license the data. How does that business work exactly?
I can't do that.
Marvin, I can try and field that one. So, Zach, these are exceptional questions, and again, for the listeners wondering, is the Novomentis stock worth its while? Is it going to reach 10x, 50x? They're exceptional questions, but we have to remember we're entering uncharted territory. But when you look at what Marvin and I are trying to develop here, the baseline we're trying to get at is we're essentially looking at a new form of autism intervention. And that's something that's going to change the entire world, right? We already have very strong evidence that was started back in the 60s that we're just picking back up and running with it in the 21st century. So that alone, again, how do you put a value on that? How do you put a value on potentially one of the greatest interventions for a worldwide disease like autism, right? So that's the $1 million question.
Yeah, and this is the beautiful thing is that the way the whole capitalistic system works, the way humans are designed is that everybody's looking for their self-interest, but that creates progress and everything else. Look, investors, they just want to make money, right? But
for sure,
that motivation drives the funding for the research and development, which creates these things to help people's lives, and it's a beautiful cycle. So
I couldn't,
Jack, win for everybody.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I couldn't have answered it better. That was a beautiful answer from someone who I'm not treating autistic children, and I used to be a pediatric kidney surgeon, and you deal with families. This man has an unusual personality to go into the homes and deal with autistic children. He told you some of the symptoms they have. Can you imagine the parents they love that child, and to have to deal with all those symptoms 24 hours a day? He's beautiful. You don't find people like John Molinaro don't fall off trees. And I'm a classic bottom line drug developer. His answer is worth much more than my answer because he's in the battle zone. I'm not in the battle zone. I'm giving John something that he can run with. I'm going to make that baton, hand it to John, and say, John, run with the baton. So his answer, you're dealing with a major breakthrough in the island called the brain. What is that worth?
Okay, on that note, gentlemen, I want to thank you, and we should do a follow probably as we get deeper into the study, maybe in about a month or so, towards as we get maybe into September, end of August, July.
Sorry. I got so excited I started coughing. Anyway.
Marvin, would we be able to do that? Would we be able to do a follow-up, as we're in the middle of the study, or as we get some initial? We can do that, right? Okay. That'll be very exciting. Yeah, because I think we should do that as like a live stream where we can get audience questions for John. And people ask, hey, what are you seeing? And you can.
Well, I can arrange it. We might want to. You ask some interesting questions about the data. Maybe I bring in the status if I can get permission from the corporation he works for. Because
he works at Nike, right? He works at Nike, the sneaker company.
He works for Nike Corporation.
Okay. He's a data scientist.
Yeah, he's brilliant. And ask him, how is he going to analyze all this data? How are you going to take 20 sheets of paper with 100 points on each sheet, and how are you going to show statistical correlation? And he can do that. It's called deep machine learning. You're deep into the data. And these are supercomputers. And he's got the technology. That's where he works for Nike Corporation.
No, it's crazy. The whole drug discovery business is becoming a data business. It's becoming a AI machine learning business almost now.
Yeah, and if the people want to see, his name is Kyle Lambert. He's on our scientific advisory board. So they could look up his CV and see that I'm not smoking any psilocybin.
Okay. Thank you, guys. On that note, we'll follow up in 6 to 8 weeks on this.
Jack, thank you so much for the opportunity, Jack. Thank you.
John, thank you very much for helping out. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.